We now live in a world where a lot of data is being collected from patients, particularly from patients who are in critical care units, who are critically sick and are cared for in intensive care units. So much data is being collected that the clinician does not have the opportunity to actually screen all of this data. A lot of the data, especially the physiologic data that is collected continuously from the patient, is put up on a screen, and there might be some rudimentary algorithms that are applied to this data. But largely that data is being discarded. But it's a great wealth of information about the state of the patient. And biomedical signal processing allows us to extract valuable information from these data streams, especially if we actually extract information from multiple data streams at the same time. So traditionally, biomedical signal processing has looked at individual data streams or as a single class of data, like the electrocardiogram, for example, or the arterial blood pressure, or the pulse plethysmogram. But all of these signals come from the same system, in this case, the cardiovascular system. So now we have a great opportunity to actually not only look at an individual signal or an individual class of signals, but to look at all of these signals at the same time. And to then try to go from analysis of the signals and try to infer properties of the systems themselves that generate these signals. And the opportunity is great because we have so much of this data. Right? So much of this data can now be routinely collected. It can be routinely archived. And we have now access to all of this data. And we can actually apply algorithms that we develop to this data. And we can then correlate the findings that we have from these algorithms to the clinical picture, to what actually happened to the patient, to certain interventions that the clinicians might have done on these patients, or to the natural progression of the disease of this patient. Right? So again, we're trying to leverage the large amounts of data that are routinely collected in every critical care unit, in every surgery suite, in every emergency room in this country, or across the world for that matter, and to find better ways of analyzing this data so that we can provide our clinical colleagues with better ways of treating these patients. So historically, a lot of data has always been collected from patients who are in critical care units or who are undergoing surgery or who might be in the emergency room. And this data is being collected because the physician wants to have a very close view of the state of physiology of this patient. As I said, historically, it has always been that way, that a lot of data has been collected. But historically, we did not have the opportunity or the possibility to archive this data. So storage used to be very expensive. We also didn't quite know if we actually had this data, what would we do with it? Now, storage of data is very, very cheap. So even from an entire hospital, we can archive routinely all the data that is being collected at bedside monitors from patients. We now have the opportunity to archive this data and then to apply algorithms to this data to understand the evolution of a disease process better, or to understand the state of the physiological system better. This is a very recent development, and not every hospital actually archives all the waveform data, all the physiological data that comes from bedside monitors. It's only a few hospitals, to my knowledge, currently do this. But it's a wonderful opportunity, simply because we acquire this data already from patients in critical care units. By archiving the data and by allowing us to actually apply signal processing algorithms to these data streams, we can actually find out a lot more about not only the natural progression of the disease, but also the potential efficacy of treatments. And it will also allow us to take better care of, or our clinical colleagues to take better care of patients in the future, because there's so much information contained in that data. We might collect 5, 6 different signals from the cardiovascular system. And these might be invasively monitored. Might be you have catheters in your arteries, a catheter in your vein. You might have multiple channels of the electrocardiogram. And so we have a lot of signals that relate to the cardiovascular health of the patient. All of these signals come from the same system, namely the cardiovascular system. So one approach that is currently being pursued in this field is whether we can actually characterize or extract features of these signals that allow us to make inference about the state of the cardiovascular system, where we can estimate parameters or variables of the cardiovascular system that cannot easily be measured, or that could only be measured with a high degree of invasiveness. So that there's information that's encoded in the signals that we already collect that will allow us to actually determine other parameters or other variables of the cardiovascular system that would help the clinician take care of the patient. But by simply looking at these waveforms, we cannot simply extract that information. That's where mathematical models of the cardiovascular system or organ systems come in, that allow us to actually phrase the relationship between different signals and the system in a mathematically quantifiable way. And then we can actually use these models to estimate parameters or to estimate state variables of the cardiovascular system, and then display these alongside these measured variables to the clinician in the hope that the augmented set of both measured and estimated parameters will actually allow the clinician to take better care of the patient, give a more holistic view, if you wish, or a more complete view of the state of the organ system, in this case the cardiovascular system. Other examples relate to cerebrovascular dynamics or lung dynamics, for example. Over time, we hope that by augmenting the set of measured data with those that are estimated, the clinicians can take better care of the patients and understand the pathophysiology as it progresses, potentially earlier, so that intervention and therapy can be administered earlier. This field is really at the intersection of biomedical engineering, clinical medicine, and I would say electrical engineering, even computer science. So in my particular area, it's really biomedical engineering, electrical engineering, and clinicians. So we work very closely with our clinical colleagues at the hospitals to understand the signals, to understand the significance of these signals, and to analyze these signals, and to provide our clinical colleagues with estimates of parameters or state estimates of organ systems that might be helpful to them. But there are also computer scientists who look at these large volumes of clinical data that is being collected at critical care units or at the entire hospital level, and they apply machine learning algorithms or approaches to this data to understand in an entire cohort of patients what might be important variables to monitor, what might be important patterns in disease progression, and what clinical interventions might make a difference, and which clinical interventions that are currently being done might actually not make a difference to the outcome of a patient. So it's truly an interdisciplinary area at the interface between engineering and clinical medicine. And the exciting part is that a lot of different disciplines are being drawn into this problem that are complementary and have different strengths in providing answers to some very basic questions in how healthcare is being delivered. The data that is used in this and archived in this research area is really data that is already collected for the standard of care. Irrespective of the research aspect of this work, clinicians decide to collect data because that data is necessary to take care of a patient. So it's really data that's being collected during routine clinical care. So there's no additional burden placed upon a patient in order to collect this data. This data is then archived at the hospital and then de-identified. The researcher, like me, has no way of identifying which patient the data might be coming from. And that is very important because there are applicable laws that exist in many countries that protects the identity of the patient. From the patient's perspective, that is obviously very important because you would not jeopardize your privacy or see your privacy jeopardized as part of participating in a research project. So the primary challenge is the de-identification of the data, the archiving of the data, the de-identification of the data, and then making the data available to researchers like me so that we can actually apply our biomedical engineering expertise to this data. We live in an age of big data. Big data is a buzzword, but it truly applies to the clinical environment because a lot of data is being collected on a daily basis from patients who are in a hospital. And now that we can archive all of this data in electronic format, we have the opportunity to go through this data and to learn a lot about the disease state of a patient and also disease states across patients in ways that we have never been able to do before. So really at the intersection of biomedical engineering, computer science, electrical engineering, and clinical medicine, we have a great opportunity to leverage the vast amount of healthcare data that is being collected on a daily basis in order to improve the way that healthcare is being delivered in a more timely manner, in a more efficient manner, and in a more efficacious manner. And I think that is a great opportunity that we will leverage over the coming decades.